great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Is that okay? Yeah, that's better. And I think even though Joffrey and I didn't speak before this or plan anything, I think it's worked out quite well because we've had a very interesting kind of journey into this, the President's personal story and Joffrey's own personal experience with the area that he comes from and so on. And myself, as a gringo, I will take a more, I guess, abstract approach and consider the President and the things that are going on from that perspective. But I mean, to start with, it's worth recognising that it's a very interesting time politically in politics globally, not just in the Philippines. There's heightened polarisation within countries. There's these divisive political figures that are gaining political power. And there's challenges to what we thought were kind of accepted norms and institutions of democracy that seem to have become up for grabs again. And I would argue that in this regard, the Philippines is no exception. So in fact, the Philippines' seeming alignment with this global trend of populist politics has seen it gain unprecedented amounts of international media attention, the curiosity and concern of people like us who might not hear about the Philippines outside of brief spurts of media reporting around disaster events like the typhoon in 2013. And I think it's fair to say that the May 2016 national election in the Philippines would have come and gone without much notice in Australia and elsewhere, but for the late entry of one brash and particularly perhaps unlikable contender in Rodrigo Duterte. And 10 months after his convincing election, the eventfulness, if you could call it that, of the President's term in office seems to continue to catch international attention. Today, I found it very interesting to note that within hours of each other, Julie Bishop, the Australian Foreign Minister, was in Manila meeting Duterte's Department of Foreign Affairs chief, while a member of the House of Representatives was doing a press conference talking about the filing of an impeachment complaint that he just made about the President. And of course, the President's hardline policies against drugs are attracting a high level of attention from international human rights organisations and the diplomatic community. Within the last few weeks, Human Rights Watch has formally asked the UN to launch an independent international investigation, claiming the President himself should be held criminally liable for the 7,000 deaths so far in the war on drugs. These are very serious claims and charges, and even without material evidence of his involvement in the killings, Duterte's rhetoric inciting violence and killing and his administration's failure to investigate complaints of the abuse of power make him personally liable under international law. And yet it seems, at least as of December, the President's popularity is still high, with an approval rating of around 80%. And I think this is really the heart of the puzzle for many of us observers, especially those of us outside who see only part of the picture. He campaigned on the rhetoric of a violent killing spree against drug users and drug sellers. He has implemented and condoned a policy which has seen a violent killing spree against even occasional drug users, and it seems to be working very well for him. How can we explain this, or even try to understand it? In the short time that I have, I would like to delve into this a little bit. And first, what I want to do is talk a little bit about Duterte himself as a political actor, his style, his strategies of winning appeal, and some of what I think are his very dangerous tactics. And second, I want to talk about the demand side of populist politics in the Philippines, why I think he resonates, what it is people hear and respond to, and why. And I hope then there'll be lots of time in the Q&A for discussion of kind of more details, or more fleshing out of this sort of stuff. So first, to what one commentator has called Dutertismo. It's how the style that Duterte has become renowned for. And perhaps that is the most significant thing, or thing to start with, is that Duterte does fit within a broader global trend of an upsurge in populist candidates whose communication style and performance is actually their political brand. So in his campaign for election, watching Duterte was, to be honest, a bit like reading from a populist handbook. Create a crisis, make the solution sound simple, and then promise that you will do anything to get it done. Position yourself as an outsider who claims to tell it like it is. And since taking office, he has claimed that the Philippines has descended into a hell of drug dependency. Drugs is a problem in the Philippines, but it's no bigger in the Philippines than in other countries, and in fact methamphetamine use in Australia is twice as high as in the Philippines. And based on this crisis, he then claims the need to concentrate power or overstep the usual boundaries of authority. And he said several times that he would not hesitate to instate martial law if necessary, whatever necessary might look like. At the same time, he has continued to deflect criticism in three ways that I can see. One is to point the finger back at dissenting or questioning voices with a sort of "who are you to question me" kind of answer. So he did it with Obama quite entertainingly. But more recently, when the elements of the Catholic Church finally came out and criticised his war on drugs, his response was, and I quote, "You're full of shit and you all stink." Another tactic is to be almost incoherent in his discourse. Like Trump, Duterte's speeches are filled with incomplete sentences and unfiltered thoughts that quickly segue from one topic to another. It is a political weapon that the political theorist John Keane calls gaslighting, which I've borrowed from him, where, in his words, the politician lies, bullshits, silences for the purpose of sowing the seeds of confusion. And it's the confusion which then leads people to doubt their capacity to make judgments for themselves about what is going on. And the third way he's been deflecting criticism, perhaps the most worrying, is by intimidation. He has on several occasions threatened or attacked journalists, saying that if they cross the line, then they deserve to be killed. This is already a country in which is the second most dangerous place to be a journalist behind Mexico. And the senator who set up a committee late last year to investigate his involvement in the Davao death squads, he told her at the time that she would rot in jail, and indeed she is now in jail on charges of bribery and extortion. And his Secretary of Justice and Attorney General refused to investigate the claims that she was making. Now, there's no doubt that that senator might not have a clean record. In fact, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find many in Philippine Congress who have clean hands. That is not the point. The point is that that sends a signal that it is dangerous to speak up against this president. If a senator can be put in jail, what might happen to me? The civil space for discussion and disagreement that we see as so important in a democracy is, I think, shrinking. Journalists and others begin to self-censor, and the vitriolic, violent, and quite frankly misogynist tone of Duterte is reproduced in the public sphere. I have friends who were getting so threatened and abused on social media for writing articles which question part of his policy that I don't know how they keep writing when they're getting that sort of attacks, to be honest. But of course we come back to this puzzle. Why are his approval ratings so high? And this brings me to the second point that I want to talk about, which is the audience, the demand side of populist politics, which I think in general gets too little attention. So in December, a poll of 1,200 people by Pulse Asia registered 83% approval rating. A few things to say about this. First, these high approval ratings of a president, especially early in their term, are not out of range with those registered in the past by presidents. Moreover, survey responses of public opinion in the Philippines need to be taken a little bit carefully. They can be confounding. If you look at comparative polling about trust in political institutions, for example, the Philippines scores amongst the highest globally alongside Scandinavia. Polls are useful, but if they're not contextualised, their interpretation can be misleading. The more important thing I think that needs to be understood is not simply that these sort of polls is not simply a rating of performance, but as a negotiated response by voters. And it's a response to the president that bears the weight not only of the recent experience of politics with all its frustrations and the unmet aspirations, but also of a long history of electoral politics in the Philippines that has relegated citizens to the sidelines. And in this regard, I think there are two narratives that Duterte has used very effectively to tap into this historical experience and quite successfully gained his supporters by that. The first is about a narrative about being for the people. serving their interests and not anyone else's. During the election campaign, he gave very few kind of serious televised interviews, and one of them he sat down and he looked directly at the camera and he said to the people watching, "I am Rodrigo Duterte, I am a Filipino, I love the Philippines because it is the land of my people." And I can just imagine how the chills ran down the spine of the Filipino people who haven't heard that very often from a politician. Or perhaps his son put it best, speaking at a crowd at a Thanksgiving concert, when he said, "We have been influenced for too long by other countries, America, Chinese. The time has come. We are Filipinos. We are talented. Let us continue the revolution. We have a chance to change our country. Let us forget for a while on the international. Let us focus on us." Well, what I have to say to that is fair enough. This is not a narrative like Trump's claim that, you know, we've been screwed over by everyone else, it's time to concentrate on America's interests, because that claim has no truth or credibility given American foreign policy over the last century. But the narrative of Duterte is about dignity. It's about people's identity, and it's about their national identity. And in the case of the Philippines, the claim has enormous emotional resonance. It taps into a latent frustration and anger of being treated as a nation, as people with indignity, not only by traditional politicians, but in particular by foreigners, and more particularly by the United States. And Duterte effectively mobilises this sort of fragile sense of identity and nationhood. So when Human Rights Watch or Obama criticise him, for the most part it seems to just slide off like Teflon. He will say, "Another foreigner trying to interfere in our country," and it is very compelling because it is so true of the past experience. The second narrative, which I think he uses, goes something like this: "I will bring change, defeat the oligarchy, bring justice for the poor, just give me the power I need to do it." We really see a negotiation here, I think, with the voters between what is essentially hope and fear. It is a risk, yes, to vote for him when he makes such claims of violence in the way that he's going to make change. But it might be a risk that people calculate is worth taking. He represents seemingly the only hope for transformation in politics. And as a friend of mine, a middle-class friend of mine who lives in Manila said, "I'll take a roller coaster over another 6 years of roundabout or merry-go-round any day." And another person said, "This is democracy which is built for regrets, but hopes as well. I'd rather have someone like Duterte try to clean government and fail." In other words, Duterte offers two things, I think, which are very powerful. They're not only powerful because I think they're central to a living democracy, but because they have been subsumed and deemed irrelevant amidst conversations of institutions and policies and performance. And the first is dignity, and the second is having your frustrations heard and knowing there is a possibility of change. And they resonate particularly strongly in the Philippines, I would argue, because democracy as a system of governance and power sharing has been more than often nothing more than nice words that have been used to manipulate. The Philippines was, after all, the first country to be democratized, if you like, by the United States. A century before Bush's freedom agenda in Afghanistan, American military annexed the Philippine Islands at the very moment an independence revolution had been fought and won against Spain. It is colonialism 101, except that this was control and subjugation and denial of sovereignty in the name of democracy for what were alleged to be benevolent purposes, because the Filipinos did not have the capacity to understand freedom and democracy, and so needed to be taught it by the United States. So it was an imperial policy which used the language of democracy, but which came in the form of humiliation and infantilization. Why do I think this history is relevant today to Duterte's politics? Because we've seen it before. Marcos in the late 1960s and early 1970s, like Duterte, developed a broad base of support amongst the urban middle class through a state-led nationalist discourse about dignity, about breaking the stalemate by destroying the oligarchy. It was so effective that in the early 1970s, political scientists, technocrats, and many other middle-class citizens who no doubt genuinely wanted to see the Philippines break from the constraints of the past praised Marcos's theory of revolution from the centre and rationalised and defended his decision to instate martial law. But of course, critics were increasingly silenced by intimidation and force, the army was radically expanded, and the rest we probably know quite well. So, in conclusion, I just have 2 points to make in sort of drawing it all together. I think the Philippines is democracy's cautionary tale, with political relevance to all of us, as throughout the 21st century, we have become giddy with excitement about the global spread of democracy, invested billions in democracy promotion aid, etc. But we can't ignore the fact that in many cases, democratisation has in fact supported an international hierarchy of power which undermines the very ideals of democracy itself. The result is, I argue, a quite understandable and even rational ambivalence about democracy, such as we see in the Philippines, which plays into the hands of populists such as Marcos and Duterte. And the second point to end on is what will happen under Duterte's presidency. And the short answer is, I don't know. Just today, as I said, an impeachment complaint in the lower house was lodged against him, citing his past record in Davao. He hasn't faced this level of internal scrutiny, so let's see how he reacts to it. But what I am more clear about is that I don't agree with Joffre that Duterte will bring social change to the social order in the Philippines for the better. And why do I say this? I say it because Duterte may, in his heart, be pro-poor. And I indeed have a sympathy for that argument, a great sympathy for it. He may indeed be. He may want to see genuine change, such as land reform and pro-poor government policies and an end to the endemic corruption. But the means by which he is going about it will not work. The Philippines needs political leaders who will make bold changes and stand up to the oligarchy, that I agree, but a leader who pledges to transform society, but does so by disempowering citizens through doubt, intimidation and fear, is not the answer. So in another survey done in December by the social weather station, 85% of people said they were happy with Duterte's attempts to curb the drug problem. But in the same survey, almost 80% of those respondents said that they lived with the fear that they or someone in their family would be the next victim of an extrajudicial killing. 94% of the respondents said that these drug users or drug sellers should not be killed, but rather given a fair trial to determine whether they are innocent or guilty. Democracy and violence don't mix well. They don't end well. History tells us that. That's one thing that we know for sure. So as much as I sympathise with what Duterte's agenda might be, I don't think that he's going about it the right way. Thank you.